In late August 1944, at 6:15 in the morning, at the 4th observation post in the French pause -D- Calais region, the German technical officers of the 15th Flak Regiment W Battalion gathered around a table piled with crumpled morning newspapers, trying to understand the data before them that violated all principles of ballistic probability. Their fingers traced across calculation papers, pencils breaking again and again, because the numbers before them completely overturned everything they had learned at the Berlin Air Force Technical Academy. 80-2% destroyed. This could not be true. This was not a statistical error, not a reporting mistake. This was the brutal reality of what happened on that extraordinary day. The room was filled with the mixed smell of coffee and cigarettes, the wall clock ticking away, each sound like a hammer blow against their taut nerves. Through dew-covered ice-field binoculars, German observers witnessed a sight completely contrary to all intelligence department assurances about Allied air defense capabilities. V-1 flying bombs launched toward London before dawn were being destroyed at an unexplainably high rate. Not shot down by Spitfire fighters through dangerous pursuit curves, not entangled by the heavy steel cables of barrage balloons, but precisely destroyed by anti-aircraft fire from the Dover coastal gun belt. 9-inch aircraft gun shells were exploding with impossible precision around the missiles, somehow detonating at exactly the right moment and exactly the right distance, without requiring a direct hit on this small target moving at 400 miles per hour. The observers rubbed their eyes, unable to believe what they were seeing, adjusting the binocular focus again and again, trying to find some reasonable explanation. At the 15th Flak Regiment W Battalion headquarters in Chateau d'Eau, the UIL, Colonel Max Wechter, commander of the entire V-1 offensive, received these reports with growing alarm. This 18th-century French chateau had once been a place of pleasure for Bourbon dynasty nobles, its marble walls still bearing traces of Rococo decoration, but now it had become the nerve center of this desperate campaign. Wechter stood before the enormous operations map, watching the red and blue markers representing V-1 launch points and interception points, feeling a deep unease rising in his heart. The telephone on his desk rang constantly, bringing more shocking news. During the German V-1 campaign, the percentage of flying bombs destroyed by the coastal gun belt rose from 17 to 70% in late August, reaching 80% on that extraordinary day in the last week of August 1944, marking the beginning of the most profound technological shock experienced by Wehrmacht weapons scientists during the war. Wechter picked up the telephone, demanding immediate contact with Berlin's Weapons Development Division. He needed answers, and he needed them now. What neither Wechter nor any German scientist knew was that they were witnessing the deployment of one of the most closely guarded weapons of World War II, a technology so revolutionary that it was protected at the same level as the Manhattan atomic bomb project in the New Mexico desert. The proximity Fuze, or what the Allies called the VT variable time Fuze, was systematically destroying Hitler's terror weapons with a precision that German physics believed should not exist. This small electronic device, no larger than a human fist, weighing less than 3 pounds, contained a technological marvel sufficient to change the course of the war. At its core was a miniature vacuum tube transmitter capable of emitting radio waves and detecting signals reflected back from the target, automatically detonating the shell when the distance was close enough. This was pure science fiction in 1944, something that German weapons scientists could not even imagine, let alone believe was actually possible. This story began 10 weeks earlier, when the British Royal Air Force Air Defense Command was on the brink of despair. The V-1 flying bombs, what the Germans called Vergeltslöffeleins, or Revenge Weapon 1, were raining down on London at a rate of hundreds per day. These pilotless jet-powered missiles flew at 400 miles per hour, carrying 2,000 pounds of a high explosive. Their arrival announced by the distinctive pulse jet engine buzzed, then sudden silence, meaning the engine had cut out and death was falling from the sky. On the streets of East London, children learned to immediately seek the nearest subway entrance as soon as they heard that buzz. Adults spent countless sleepless nights in underground shelters, listening to those buzzes growing closer, then deafening explosions. The stained glass windows of Westminster Cathedral were shattered. Craters pocked the gardens of Buckingham Palace. The entire city trembled. In June 1944, the month of the Normandy landings, British air defense efforts were nearly futile. The coastal gun built required an average of 2,003.7-inch and 9.2-inch heavy anti-minus aircraft shells to destroy a single V-1. The cost of each V-1 was negligible compared to 2,000 shells. This war of attrition putting Britain's ammunition reserves at risk of exhaustion. Royal Air Force fighter pilots risked their lives performing close-range intercepts, sometimes even using their wings to tip the flying bombs. This dangerous tactic called tipping. Successful pilots awarded special diver tips badges. Barrage balloon nets caught some in South London, but most still got through. London citizens spent countless nights in underground shelters, listening to those buzzes growing closer, then explosions. Death tolls in newspapers increased daily, the atmosphere in air raid shelters growing increasingly oppressive. However, by July, changes began to happen quietly. Interception rates began to rise slowly but steadily. Royal Air Force pilots noticed that their shells suddenly seemed more effective, even though they had not changed any tactics, and anti-minus aircraft gunners had not received new training. By early August, interception rates had reached 50%, an encouraging but still insufficient number. Then, in the last week of August, there was a dramatic leap. On that extraordinary day of August 20-5th, of the 105 V-1 second launched by Germany from the Pause-D-Cully region, 80-6 were destroyed before reaching London city limits. 80-2% success rate. This was simply impossible according to traditional ballistics, unless something fundamentally different, some secret weapon that German intelligence, aware, had completely failed to detect. On the German Baltic coast at Peenem-und, weapons scientists worked frantically, trying to understand what was happening across the Atlantic. They covered enormous drawing boards with complex ballistic curves, performed countless wind tunnel tests and computer calculations in their laboratories, trying to find why Allied air defense fire had suddenly become so effective. They suspected Britain had improved centimeter-wave radar or used faster mechanical time fuses, but never imagined there could be self-thinking smart shells. When captured American VT fuses were shown in early 1945, German scientists expressed disbelief, shaking their heads, rubbing their eyes as if watching some magic show. They could not understand how fragile glass vacuum tubes could survive the massive acceleration of 20,000 times gravity, how miniature batteries could remain alive through violent vibration, how delicate circuits could still function after being fired from an artillery piece. They estimated they were a full 10 years behind American technology, a devastating psychological blow to proud German engineers. Leading the proximity Fuze development was Drive Merle Tuve of the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory. This gray-haired physicist, wearing round glasses, led a massive team of thousands of scientists and engineers working under strict security conditions in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Their laboratories were surrounded by high barbed wire fences. Guards patrolled 20-4 hours a day. All personnel had to undergo strict background checks. Dr. Blader reflected that success came from systematic cooperation between scientists, engineers, and production workers, something that totalitarian systems could not achieve. In Nazi Germany, scientists were divided among different competing projects, lacking communication with each other, even jealous of each other, while in America, experts from different fields worked closely together, freely sharing ideas and data. Proximity Fuze proved that the outcome of war I was decided in laboratories and factories to no less an extent than on battlefields. while Germany pursued various exotic wonder weapons from V- to ballistic missiles to Me-260 to jet fighters. From Mars Super- heavy tanks to sun guns, America focused on multiplier technologies that enhanced existing weapons. The V- to rocket, Me-260 to jet fighter, Mars Super- heavy tank, these were all genius masterpieces of German engineering, but they were produced into small numbers, came too late to fundamentally change the outcome of the war. In contrast, the proximity Fuze increased the effectiveness of every anti-aircraft gun by 5 to 10 times. This was a practical technological breakthrough that could be produced and immediately deployed. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal wrote in his later memoirs, the proximity Fuze helped blaze the trail to Japan. Without the protection this ingenious device provided to fleet surface ships, our westward advance could not have been so rapid. Personnel and ship losses would have been immeasurably greater. The V-1 program relied heavily on slave labor. Tens of thousands of concentration camp prisoners died in underground factories throughout Germany, manufacturing these revenge weapons designed to create terror. Prisoners at Dora concentration camp struggled through hunger, disease, and brutal mistreatment by the SS, living in dark, damp underground cells, working more than 12 hours a day, fed only moldy bread and thin soup. They knew that with every completed V-1, more London women and children might die, but they had no choice. Refusal to work meant immediate execution. Meanwhile, in America, workers voluntarily worked overtime for time amount exactly what they were producing, but understanding its importance from the serious expressions of management. At the Sylvania Ipswich factory in Massachusetts, more than 5,000 women worked 12 hours a day, producing specialized miniature electronic components in dust-free workshops. They wore white protective gloves, carefully assembling those tiny electronic components, not knowing how many lives these little things would save. They only discovered from newspapers after the war ended that they had helped save London from Hitler's terror weapons. The secret of the proximity Fuze was completely maintained, one of the most successful secrecy operations of the war. Royal Air Force air defense gunners did not know what was making their shells suddenly so effective. They only knew that suddenly their hit rate had increased several times over. They had special ammunition boxes with strict accounting requirements, each shell having a unique serial number. Usage must be recorded in detail. Every proximity Fuze shell fired at V-1 second was carefully tracked. Unexploded duds were immediately protected by special forces. Royal Navy destroyers patrolled the English Channel to prevent German divers from recovering duds that might have fallen into the sea. Even Prime Minister Winston Churchill was kept in the dark, only personally informed of the secret by General Dwight Eisenhower in July 1944. This strict secrecy came at a cost, a heavy cost. Until the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, Allied ground forces could not use proximity fuses or use artillery against ground targets because of fear that duds would fall into German hands and expose the secret. Tens of thousands of American and British soldiers died because this technology was too secret to risk. They died in the snow of the Ardennes forest, in the mountains of Italy, exchanging their lives for the security of this secret. However, using them against V-1 second was completely justified because London's survival during the invasion was critical. If London had been destroyed by V-1 terror bombing, British morale might have completely collapsed. The entire course of the war might have completely changed. For Germany, the V-1 program consumed massive critical resources while achieving minimal strategic impact. A total of about 20-5,000 V-1 second were launched, costing hundreds of millions of Reichsmarks and diverting valuable resources from fighter and anti-tank weapon production, all desperately needed on the shrinking front lines. The program's reliance on slave labor added a heavy moral dimension to its failure. The proximity Fuze was defeating weapons built through human suffering, This stark contrast only fully understood after the war. When Dora concentration camp survivors saw photos of London in the spring of 1945, they knew their suffering had not been completely in vain. They had unintentionally helped the Allied victory, albeit in the most tragic way. The proximity Fuze represented a fundamental transformation in the nature of warfare, achieving victory through systems, engineering en masse production, rather than superiority of individual weapons. Proved that modern war was a contest of entire industrial systems, not just military force. Before saving Pacific Fleet ships and contributing to Japan's defeat, the proximity Fuze first saved London. German officers and soldiers, standing on the cliffs of the French Pas-Calais coast, watching V-1 second fall, never understood why. They watched their revenge weapons turn into orange fireballs in the skies over southern England, without knowing what had defeated them. The technology that defeated them was completely unimaginable within their scientific framework, just as medieval knights could not understand the power of firearms. This transformation was dramatic, almost instantaneous. Before the proximity Fuze, destroying one V-1 required an average of 2,000 heavy anti-aircraft shells, a desperate number that was simply unsustainable. With the proximity Fuze, this dropped to 100 shells, a full 20-fold reduction. The Dover coastal gun belt's interception rate rose from 17% to 80% in just 10 weeks, a shocking military advancement. This was not achieved through additional courage or better training, but through the mass production of advanced technology on a scale that Germany could not match or understand. America's industrial machine was operating at full speed, producing weapons that German weapons designers could only dream of. America mobilized its entire electronics industry, from the East Coast to the West Coast, employing more than 80,000 workers and investing more than $1 billion to produce 20 million fuses. This was an industrial project of unprecedented scale, involving hundreds of factories dispersed across America, from old New England factories to new California facilities, to prevent attack by German long-range bombers. Proximity Fuze was declassified in September 1945, shortly after Japan's surrender aboard the USS Missouri. The U.S. War Department's announcement began one of the most important weapons developed during the war, its effectiveness second only to the atomic bomb. For those German weapons scientists who had been confused by the V-1's failure, this revelation brought understanding and deep humiliation. They were not defeated by brilliant strategy or superior courage, but by industrial capacity they could not imagine. Post-war interviews with former German weapons scientists revealed their shock and loss. They had believed their V-1 represented the pinnacle of weapons technology, the perfect revenge tool. Learning that it had been defeated by mass-minus, produced inexpensive electronics, each costing less than $20, was a devastating psychological blow to them. They were not defeated by warriors on the battlefield, but by assembly lines, by those ordinary women working at the Sylvania Ipswich factory in Massachusetts. Proximity Fuze technology later evolved into modern air defense systems, radar altimeters, and electronic warfare capabilities, its impact extending far beyond the scope of World War II. For former German weapons scientists, this remained a permanent reminder of their wartime blindness, painful evidence of their failure to see the future of industrial warfare. The proximity Fuze proved in the clearest way that in modern war, mass-minus producing reliable good technology was more important than manufacturing a small number of perfect weapons. Germany produced a series of brilliant individual weapons, Tiger tanks, Me-260 to jet fighters, V- to rockets, but they were too few in number, too complex to produce, came too late to fundamentally change the outcome of the war. America produced effective weapons by the millions. They might not have been as refined and impressive as German weapons, but they were numerous, highly reliable, and could be immediately put into large-scale use. On that extraordinary day in late August 1944, when the proximity Fuze destroyed 80-2% of German V-1 second, the nature of warfare was forever changed. Germans launching revenge weapons from the cliffs of the Pause-de-Calais never knew what invisible technology had defeated them. They watched their dreams burn to ashes in the skies over England. By their own understanding, the Germans had done everything right, developing advanced weapons, training elite crews, achieving amazing engineering breakthroughs. Yet they were defeated by mass-produced electronics they could not even imagine. The proximity Fuze saved London through thousands of precise small explosions, each guided by miniature electronic technology that German science believed impossible. This was the decisive victory of industrial democracy over totalitarian engineering, of mass production over hand-made perfection, of multiplied simple practical solutions over complex but impractical wonder weapons. This was the collision of two fundamentally different philosophies of warfare, with America's pragmatic approach ultimately prevailing. The Germans never discovered what hit their V-1 second as they burned falling from the sky, defeated by a secret they could not conceive and an industrial power they could not match. The proximity Fuze turned Hitler's weapons of terror into London's salvation, and the Germans only understood how or why long afterward, many years after the war ended. When the war ended in 1945 and the truth finally came out, many former German weapons scientists felt shock and deep shame, realizing they had been pursuing the wrong path, wasting precious resources on wonder weapons that could not change the outcome of the war. The story of the proximity Fuze also teaches us that in war, the simplest solutions are often the most effective. German weapons designers were obsessed with creating perfect, complex, impressive weapons, while American engineers focused on practical improvements that made existing weapons more effective. This philosophical difference ultimately decided the outcome of the war. The Tiger tank may have been the most feared tank of World War II, but Germany produced less than 2,000 of them, while America produced nearly 50,000 Sherman tanks. And although the Sherman may have been inferior to the Tiger in 1-on-1 combat, the absolute superiority in numbers ultimately decided the outcome. Similarly, the V-2 rocket was an amazing technological achievement, but it only killed about 9,000 people, most of them slave laborers, while the proximity Fuze saved tens of thousands of London lives and fundamentally transformed the nature of air defense warfare. In the decades after the war ended, proximity Fuze technology continued to evolve, giving birth to modern air defense missile systems, air-to-air missiles, and various precision-guided weapons. Today's Patriot missiles, Standard missiles, and other advanced air defense systems can all trace their origins back to that tiny electronic device that changed the course of warfare in late August 1944. Even the space program benefited from this technology, radar altimeters evolving from proximity Fuze technology, helping Apollo astronauts land safely on the lunar surface. Ultimately, America's greatest victory was not on the beaches of Normandy, not in the forests of the Ardennes, but in the factories where millions of ordinary workers, many of them housewives who didn't know what they were making, produced the tiny electronic devices that saved a city and forever changed the nature of warfare. The 80-2% interception rate achieved in late August 1940 proved that in modern war, industrial capacity could defeat any wonder weapon, no matter how ingenious and impressive. The proximity Fuze was more than just a weapon. It was powerful evidence that a democracy's ability to mobilize science and industry could overcome the forced brilliance of tyranny. And the Germans, standing on the cliffs of the Pause-de-Calais, watching their perfect weapons fall from the sky, never knew why they had already lost to war. Their leaders were still insisting they were winning. The true victors of this war were not generals covered in medals, but workers on assembly lines, scientists in laboratories, ordinary people who believed in democracy and industrial power. When we look back today on that extraordinary August day, We should remember that true power often comes from the most unexpected places, from ordinary people working quietly without seeking recognition. In that decisive moment, it was not superheroes, but workers on assembly lines, scientists in laboratories, gunners at anti-mine aircraft batteries, who together made history. Their story reminds us that no matter how powerful the enemy, the spirit of unity, innovation, and hard work is always the most powerful weapon. This story about the proximity Fuze is not just a story about military technology, but a story about human wisdom, creativity, and resilience, a story worth remembering forever. If you want more fascinating breakdowns of history's most incredible technological breakthroughs and forgotten war secrets, smash that like button and subscribe right now. I'm your history observer, and I'll see you on the next battlefield of forgotten historical secrets.